What's going on, everybody? This is TAETRO, and you guys voted Beat F1 today's beat tutorial. If you didn't watch the original matchup, you should click up here and go ahead and check that out. But today I'm going to be teaching you guys how I made that beat with the AKAI MPK Mini. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's take a look. This is a really simple track. It's got 6 parts. I know it has 7 tracks, but we'll get to talking about, this little ghost track in a bit. But for the first musical idea in the track, and we're using the AKAI MPK Mini today, the Blackout Edition. Got a little Darth Vader sticker on here I got on Redbubble. But the first musical idea we're going to use today is playing the UHE Diva instrument, which is one of my favorite. It's a preset called FMR Juno 23 Celesta. That's what it sounds like. That's the first part of the track. This track is in A minor. So everything is based around the A minor scale, that first chord being A, C, and E. Really quick, I'll talk about what that kind of tonality is, and that's an extension. And when we think of chords, usually we think of the root, the third, the fifth. That's like your very basic triad chord. The third making it what's major or minor. We talked about that in the last tutorial. So this is a minor chord. Then if we keep stacking notes on top of each other, you see if I add a G here, that's a 7. So you can think of these as 1, 3, 5, 7. And if we add another note on top of that, that's a 9. Now, just a really brief explanation of this, the scale of A minor goes like this. A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or the 1 again. So A, goes back up to the 1, but if you call this 8, then naturally the next note is 9, technically 2. So A to B would be 1, 2. Same thing for up here, but we're going to call it 8, 9. So when we play a big extended chord like that, we're adding a 9 on top. We're just arpeggiating it. We're not playing it all at once. We're separating the notes out in a rhythm. Now, if we want to look at just the notes that were played in this little note mode here in Ableton, we can click this fold button. Now you can get a clearer picture of the actual notes that I played. So the next chord we arpeggiated was D, E, C. So you see that's still kind of an A minor chord, but what's actually happening is the D is in the bass, which is implying more of a D minor chord, which becomes more clear when we play an F. Now, if we were playing a normal D minor in root position, meaning the D is on the bottom and the notes are in order, we would have D, F, A. But when you play notes out of order, that's called an inversion. So we have that F up here. If instead of playing that F up here, we just pretended it was down here, you could see that we have a D, F, A, which is your D minor chord, a C as well, and then also an E. So we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, another 9 chord. So it's just inverted, whereas the first chord, everything was played in order, ascending order. This one, we've just sort of rearranged the notes so that that third is on top. Really brief overview of like how the harmony of the song works or how these chords are working, but that riff is the backbone for this beat, and it's the first musical idea I came up with to come up with this beat. All right, so the next musical idea that comes in is the drums. We have a really simple drum rack here that is just made up of 4 samples. We have 808s, which I use for the kick. We have one tuned to the A, which is the root note of that first chord. And then we have another one tuned to D, which is the root note of the second chord. Notice that these 3 samples, one of the 808s, the snare, and the clap, those are all from the Boy Wonder kit. This first 808 is just from a different kit. So I usually pick and choose from different kits within Splice when I'm choosing samples. Now, one thing you're going to want to do if you use 808s like this in a drum rack is put them in the same choke group. Otherwise, they'll bleed over each other. And I don't want those 2 very low sub sounds to bleed over each other and cause, they'll pretty much interfere with each other and it sounds bad. So we can do that by going into this menu here and turning I/O on. If I find the first 808, you'll see it says choke none. And I can put it in choke group 1. I can do the same with the second 808, but I want to put it in the same choke group. Now they're cutting each other off. So when I play the next 808 after playing this one, it cuts it off. And that's actually just a style of chopping things up in drum rack that you can apply to not just 808s, but different types of samples. So a very basic drum pattern here. And that's going to get into our next sound, but before we do that, I want to show you guys what this little drum rack here is all about. I have that set up because since I'm using 808s with the drum rack, and those essentially are my kicks for the song, I want to sidechain everything to the kick pattern, but it's using 2 different samples because it's 808s, 2 different notes. So I don't want to set up my sidechain to be from 2 different notes. I just want one steady note that it can get its signal from. And that's this little like dummy track that I have set up here. It basically takes that 808 pattern, and instead of having it across 2 different drums, it puts it all in the same line. So what I did was, this is the original drum pattern. I took this 808 pattern and this 808 pattern, put them in the same line. I'm going to change that back really quick. And then I copy and pasted it and put it here so that my sidechain compressors are getting a signal from this single drum hit. And I also have it as a different drum sound, just like a really short nothing kick, because I want the sidechain to be really quick and snappy, not really long like an 808. So I just set it to this. I just found the first short kick that I could find with a snappy attack. Turn that track off, and then you'll see if we go into our next sound, what we have is the sidechain compressor, and it is receiving signal from 3. And it also seems like I forgot to delete this little clap pattern from that pattern, so let me get rid of that so that's not triggering the sidechain. Boom, fixed that. Okay, so the next sound we're going to hear is a vocal sample. So I talked about this in the last video, but I basically transpose in my head when I'm using samples most of the time. I don't usually transpose it in the sampler or simpler, which I'm using right here. I just know in my head that I can find the right sound. So you'll see that the chord I'm actually playing here seems to be based around a E major chord, which is not in the key of A minor, but is transposing in our heads. Because this gets further complicated when you're working with samples and you're tuning them, this note actually bends up to a different note. So you would have to tune to that second note if you were working with this sample. Let me show you what that will look like with the tuner. You see it scoops up from a B to a C, from a D to an E, F to a G. So if you were tuning this, you would want to make sure you were listening to the sample and tuning accordingly. But I really like the sound of a sample that moves when you just hold one note. But let me strip this sample of its effects so I can show you what it sounded like before I processed it. I had a pedal device on here, my basic audio processing rack, which we can turn the effects off one by one so you can hear that. And we also had some chorus on there, and it's sidechained to the kick, but that doesn't matter right now. Let's hear this sample dry. Way different than what it sounded like before. Just a really simple ooh sound. But let's kind of turn some of these effects on one by one, and I'll start with basic audio processing because that's where I start with all my samples. First thing I did was EQ. I cut out some of the lows and rolled off some of the highs. Actually, a lot of the highs and a lot of the lows. Also, we have some delay here on the send, so don't forget about that. So already we're shaping the sound. This is like thinking about the mix too while we're going. Then we have some reverb. Really big reverb, almost 10 seconds, and then the dry wet is up to 50%. If I go to the compressor now, that's basically giving us a ton of volume and making that sound nice and, flat dynamically. But that's not all. So we obviously added in the pedal, which totally transforms the sound. So here's before, here's after. That's almost like a really brassy synth kind of sound that we have there. So we're on the fuzz setting. Gain is dialed up a little bit to 7.8%, but the dry wet is dialed way back to 31%. I demonstrated this in last week's tutorial, but let me just crank that to 100, which is how it will default. It's not terrible, but it's a little too much for my taste. So I'm going to keep that at the 31 it was on. So we still have a bit of that original sample in there. Then finally we have chorus. Try that before. I think the chorus is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the mix to sort of spread it out between left and right and not keep it so dead center. So it's a lot wider with that chorus on. And it just has a little bit of a more interesting texture than without the chorus. So let's hear what that sounds like with the beat. When this vocal sample comes in, you'll see that also a Boy Wonder hi-hat sample loop comes in, which I put some chorus on to kind of do the same thing, widen and not keep that steady in the center hi-hat sound. I want to really spread it. Hi-hats get really redundant and harsh to my ears, so I like to add a little something to them to make them a little softer, I guess. So this is what it sounds like when they both come in. So with the layers that we've already added, we've added a lower kind of synth sound. It's kind of like an in the middle keyboard synth sound. We've added the drums, percussion obviously, and we've added this bleed, which is not so high. Like this is not sitting on top of the mix at all. It's more so blending just above that original keyboard synth sound. So the next thing I've done is added a lead instrument that is sort of like raindrops, and I've added it so that it's trickling on top of the mix. It's on a higher register than most of the things that are playing at the time. And this is another UHE plugin called Repro 5. The preset is called Toy Piano. So let me just show you what that sounds like. Everything being sent to a delay on the sends. Well, not everything, but if you're hearing a delay on something, it's because I've got a delay send set up. So this fits in the mix really well because we don't have anything really playing up here yet. And that's both like a mixing tip and, musical orchestration tip. You don't want a bunch of things competing to be in the same space, whether that's low, mid, or high. So you want to choose carefully what goes where. Boom. So that's really easy. I call that a raindrop lead. You'll hear that in a lot of music. And then we have one more musical idea that comes in. Let's see what synth I used here. Another diva. So this is Juno Jupiter 58 PWM chorus B. Oh boy. So everything was kind of round and middle to low, going into that sort of raindrop lead. And that lead kind of is somewhere between square wave and sine wave land, where it's just like really soft, unimposing, I would say. We're going to now enter in with a brand new sound that kind of breaks the mold and really stands out. So let's see if this... There it is. So this is definitely more like a saw wave style keyboard effect. And it's playing chords straight up, not arpeggiated. And that's the first instrument here that's doing that, that's just playing straight chords. Now you'll notice that we're playing pretty much the same chords as the first instrument, but higher up and obviously not arpeggiated. So we have the 7 chord again, A, C, E, 1, 3, 5, G on top is a 7. And then we also add in the 9, I should say, just like we talked about before. Let's see what that sounds like with the rest of the tracks. You see that these chords basically follow suit with the original chords from the track. I already demonstrated the A minor chord over here. And then we have something very similar to something that plays in D minor land over here. But if you put all those pieces together, you have what I think is a pretty cool sounding beat. And you can also notice here, I dropped out this raindrop lead, as I'm calling it, when this keyboard lead came in. And I don't think it's because the musical ideas would sound bad together. I think it's mostly because these would be occupying some of that same space in our ears. Let me hear what it sounds like with it all together. Sound terrible, but what I'm thinking about when I'm making decisions like that is, what do I want the audience to be listening to? And since this new big giant keyboard instrument was coming in and it was really like finishing off the track, I wanted to get rid of that higher lead because our ears are drawn to the high stuff, and just go ahead and let the keyboard, this track 5, have its day. That's the track. Alright, if there's any lingering questions or things you still want to know about that beat, let me know in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Make sure you tune in to the next BeatBatch so you can vote for which beat gets the tutorial. Make sure you subscribe for more live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer, and don't forget to pick up some of the new TAETRO merch. Alright, thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.